What's up, everyone? So in this video, I'm going to be touching on some topics I haven't talked about on my channel yet, which are basic conditional statements with if and elif in Python, and basic for loops in Python. Of course, they'll both be in the context of learning Python in Excel. And the reason I want to introduce these topics is because in my next video on sentiment analysis, I want you to be able to understand what's going on. So please enjoy this Python in Excel tutorial. So before we get started, as with most projects, we need to load the Excel data into Python as a data frame, and we do that by typing equals py tab. When you do that, you'll get this little py right here in the formula bar with a green left margin there. So you'll know you're in the Python code editor. And then you just type in a variable name here, set that equal to, and then you click and highlight the cells. And then if you don't have headers equals true automatically applied to the code when you highlight the cells, then you need to add it. I'm in the online version of Excel, so it typically doesn't add headers equals true to the Excel function when you highlight. But if you're in the desktop version, it should automatically do it. But if for some reason it's not doing it in the desktop version, then just make sure you have headers equals true right here. And then you press Control Enter. And then we have all these cells are now in a data frame, as you can see at the top here, with our header as temperatures, because we set headers equal to true, and all the values. I already loaded the Excel data into a data frame called temperature readings, so I can just get rid of that code I just did here and reference my data frame as temperature readings for the remainder of the demo. Okay, so the first new concept I want to go over is the if block in Python. Its use case kind of comes into play when you would typically use the if or ifs function in Excel, but obviously the syntax is going to be a lot different. So the way you start an if block in Python is always going to be with the if keyword, and then you have a test of some sort, and then you have a colon, and the test needs to yield either a true or false value. Two quick notes about that. If you want to check for not equal to, it's exclamation point equals. And then if you want to check for exactly equal, you have to put two equal signs. Other than that, it functions just like Excel. But we're going to keep it greater than or equal to for right now. So you have the if keyword, your test that yields a true or false, the colon, and then the next line is what code should run if your test is true, and that code needs to be indented one time from the if keyword above it. And you can have as many more lines of code after as you want. Just note that they all have to be indented one time from the if keyword. Then if you have additional conditions you want to test, you use the keyword elif, and that stands for else if. Having elifs in your if block is optional, but if you do have them, it basically functions the same exact way as an if statement. So you have your elif keyword, you have your test, you have a colon, and then you have the code to run if the test is true, and that's indented one indent from the elif keyword. And you can have as many elifs as you want. And then at the end of your if blocks, it's optional, but typically a good idea to include the keyword else with no test. If you have no test, it's always going to equal true. So this code will run basically if all these are false. So just to walk you through a quick example of how it works, this temperature reading variable is referenced in each test here. So temperature reading is 83. So if 83 is greater than or equal to 100, then execute this code here, but it's not. So we go to the next test. Is 83 greater than or equal to 80? It is. So then we execute this code here. And because this is true, we ignore or skip all the rest of the code in the block. So say this was 100 or 102, that would mean this first test is true. So we execute this code and then skip the rest of this. So since temperature reading is 102, it looks like temperature category would be extremely hot. So there it is, extremely hot. Let's say temperature reading was 32. We would run through this test. It would test as false. So we skip that. This test is false. So we skip that. This test is false. So we skip that. This test is false. So we skip this. And then since all these were false, this code would execute and temperature category equals cold, as you can see right here. So that's just a quick overview of if statements. There's a lot of more little nuances, but I just wanted to get your feet wet a little bit with it. So next, I just quickly wanted to go over the anatomy and sort of mechanics, if you will, of a for loop. Of a basic for loop in Python. There's a few different kinds of loops and even different kinds of for loops. So for a basic for loop, we start off with the keyword for. Then we have our iterator variable. This is going to change. The value of this is going to change as the loop loops through. And each time the loop loops through, it's called an iteration. Then we have our in keyword. And then we have a reference to a collection of values. So in this case, it's a column, it's the cells in the column of a data frame. And we do that just by referencing that column in the data frame. So if you remember temperature readings, we define that up here in this cell as these Excel values right here. And then to get, there's only one column, but you still have to specify it. So to get it, we do open square brackets, and then we put the column name, temperatures, in quotes, and then we close square brackets. So that's going to give us our collection of values. And the number of values that is in this collection is going to be the number of times the loop iterates through or goes through this body of code. Okay, so then we have a colon, and then the loop body is kind of like the nuts and bolts of the loop, is always going to be indented one tab from the for keyword. And if you have multiple lines of code, you have to indent those as well. We are going to use the .append method, which is basically like a function that works with lists. And whatever value is inside of its parentheses, it's going to add to the list that it stems from. So in this case, it's the temperature readings list, which is up here, which we defined up here to have nothing in it. You need to have a list in existence before you can use the .append. So that's why we have this up here. We also are defining our list outside of the loop, because if we define it inside of the loop, then each time the loop iterates through, it would just reset, if that makes sense. So really our only option is to create the list outside of the loop. So in the context of this basic for loop, for the first iteration, our temperature iterator variable will be equal to 87, because that is the first value in our collection of values, and 87 gets appended, so added to the list. So it would be like that. And then on the second iteration is 72, so we plug 72 into there, which appends 72 to the list. Third iteration is 100, so we append, so we append 100 to the list, and it loops all the way through until we get to the last value in the collection of values. And I will delete these because that's going to mess up our list. And there we have our list. So notice this is a list and not a data frame like up here. So kind of a pointless task, but I just wanted to show you something very basic so you can easily understand how a loop works and just kind of the concept of it. So in this next example, we're going to be building a procedure that takes each one of these temperature readings and assigns them a value based on these conditional statements, just like we did here, except we're using a loop so that we can get a list of all the values as opposed to just one value at a time. So the way this is going to work is we have our temperature reading iterator variable here, and that is referenced in each conditional statement to see which category it falls into. And for the conditional statement that is true, it's going to append the temperature item category list that we defined outside of the loop up here. So let's just run through the first few iterations just to solidify your understanding. Our collection of values is the temperatures column of the temperature readings data frame. So first value of that is 87, so we plug that in. Is 87 greater than or equal to 100? No. So we skip this line of code, go to the next test. Is 87 greater than or equal to 80? Yes. So we execute this line of code, which adds the word hot like this. So under the hood in the background, this is what the list looks like after the first iteration. And then since this was true, we skip all this code and go to the second iteration in the loop, which is 72. So is 72 greater than or equal to 100? No. So is 72 greater than or equal to 80? No. So we skip. Is 72 greater than or equal to 68? Yes. So then comfortable gets added to the list like that. And then one more, we'll just do 100, or the third iteration, which is going to be our third value in our collection of values, which is going to be 100, is temperature reading, which equals 100, greater than or equal to 100? Yes, it is. So we append extremely hot to the list. And that process repeats and repeats until you get to the last value in the list, which ultimately gives us a list that looks like this and correlates with these values. So 87 is hot, 72 is comfortable, 100 is extremely hot, and so on and so on and so on. So in this example here, I'm basically just taking the list from here and adding it as a column to this data frame here. And the way you do that is very easy. You just type the name of the data frame and then a square bracket and then the column header for the new column. You can make it whatever you want, it just has to be in quotes, and then you close the square bracket and then you set that equal to the list, this list, which we set as temperature category. And then you press Control Enter and we have our data frame. And then one final quick last step in case you don't already know how to do it, build this data frame temperature readings create a new Python cell by typing equals py tab, and then change the Python output to Excel values. And then you can reference that cell. You don't need headers equals true, and then you press Control Enter. And as you can see, we have the data frame that you preview by clicking on the PY tab. This data frame is now in Excel. So that about does it for our overview of basic for loops and if blocks. In the next video, we are going to be using these concepts as part of our sentiment analysis project. That's going to be a good one, so be on the lookout for it. If you have any questions or comments, just leave me a message in the comments for this video and I will be sure to address them. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.